Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so today I'm kind of delighted, because I'm going to be showing you an old deck that I played at a tournament, did very well indeed, a very unusual deck that the vast majority of people never played, but is incredibly fun. It's Quad Kyurem, a deck that I played, according to the 6 Prizes article that I wrote. I'll pop a link to that one in the description, back in 2012. And even a lot of people who were playing back in 2012 probably don't remember the deck terribly well. Now, the main card around which it revolved was, and this probably won't shock you given the name, Kyurem. The Outrage Kyurem, and we've been talking about Outrages recently. Of course, Zekrom and Reshiram were reprinted as Outrages in Shining Legend. Annoyingly, Kyurem wasn't. Now, we are getting a reprint of Kyurem as an Outrager in Dragonstorm, but it's not the same because it's not a water Pokemon. And actually, the main attack that I was using Reshiram for here was not the Outrage. It was a second attack that the new Kyurem doesn't actually have. Ladies and gentlemen, it was Glaciate. Now, you had to put free water energy onto Kyurem, which was a pain. But then it did 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. And the plan here was very simple. You Glaciate. And then the next turn you Glaciate. And then the next turn you Glaciate. And you just sit there doing 30 damage every single turn until you end up winning. And it was fun. Now, the energy here was a pain. You couldn't actually use double colorless energy here. And to be blunt, there was no energy acceleration whatsoever in this deck. It was a fairly slow moving deck. But you always did have Outrage to fall back on 20 damage plus as much as is on you. And that could use double colorless energy. So if you ever ended up in a position where your opponent didn't quite KO you, and a lot of the time they wouldn't quite KO you, I mean, 2 of the big Pokemon around at the time were Reshiram and Zekrom, both of which hit for 120, which meant they couldn't actually go ahead and get a KO, although Plus Power was seeing a fair bit of play back then. If they don't KO you, but they get close, you can then come in with Outrage, but the ideal here is you block with one Kyurem, just letting it soak up damage, and then you come in and start glaciating with subsequent Kyurem. Now, it wasn't all bad in terms of the energy. We did play Experience Share, and that was a very good, very useful card, and you would play multiples of these so that when one of your Kyurem got KO'd, you would then be able to hopefully get free of those energy onto free bench Kyurem, and then after the first couple get KO'd, it kind of generates itself after you get going. The first one's really slow, but the first time you get one KO'd, then you get a free energy on. But then, after 2 get KO'd, then one sitting on the bench of an EXP share has 2 free energy, so your manual attachment for the turn will lead you to a Glaciate. And if you can Glaciate every single turn, you would beat a lot of the matchups at the time. But it wasn't just Kyurem from Noble Victories. I also played Kyurem EX. I told you, ladies and gentlemen, I went full Kyurem. And it was really the first attack here, Frozen Wings. 1 water energy, 2 colorless, so again, double colorless is in play, 60 damage, and you discard a special energy attached to the defending Pokemon. Now, there were a whole bunch of decks around at the time that played stuff like double colorless energy and like rainbow energy, so this did come in very, very handy, especially against a Mewtwo, because Mewtwo was everywhere back then, and Mewtwo would just pile energy on and start hitting, and even with just a double colorless energy, it was a very efficient attacker. So you just get rid of their double colorless energy while doing 60 damage, and you're looking quite good. And then obviously I played 2 Mewtwo because, I mean, it was 2012. You played Mewtwo. You had to play Mewtwo. You didn't want to play Mewtwo, but if your opponent came out and was able to just get a big Mewtwo going, it would run through all your Kyurem in a row, and the best counter to Mewtwo was Mewtwo. One more Pokemon I played here was Shaman from Unleashed. Shaman from Unleashed was an absolute beast back in the day. It just allowed you, with Celebration Wind, the ability to just move all your energy around the field. So if you had 2 energy on one Kyurem, but then it was getting a bit beaten up, you could retreat it, get it out the active, and then switch the energy onto a new Kyurem, for argument's sake. It was an awful lot of fun. It wasn't the best deck in the format, but it was a great little rogue. Now, we'll have a quick look at matchups in a minute, but first, a look at the trainers. Back then, we had Professor Oak's new theory. Professor Oak's new theory is just Cynthia. Back then, it was an absolute no-brainer staple, just as great draw power. And similarly, back then, we had Professor Juniper, which is just Professor Sycamore, so you can see that in 6 years, we've basically just gone from using Juniper and Pont to Sycamore and Cynthia, but they're the same cards. We also had 2 copies of N because N was out then and we all know N is good. But one card that was brilliant here was Twins. Twins it's kind of like an old Teammates, except you could just use it when you were behind on prizes, potentially several turns in a row. And the great thing about Twins was you would probably go down a prize or 2 here because your aim was to glaciate. You didn't want to take big prizes early. You wanted to glaciate, and take multiple prizes at once. And then, of course, that left you less susceptible to N as well. So Twins here was just a wonderful card because you would rarely take the prize lead here. Dual Ball was absolutely amazing. Flip 2 coins for each heads. Search for a basic Pokemon, and in a deck that only played basic Pokemon, that was amazing. You play Pokemon Catcher here, but remember this was 2012, this was before the Pokemon Catcher errata, which meant it didn't require a coin flip, it was a Lysander in item form. And a lot of the time, you would just use this to try and strand a Pokemon in the active to get more Glaciates out. It was an awful lot of fun. Similarly here, for Junkarm was an absolute no-brainer. Junkarm, discard 2 cards from your hand, grab an item, as it was a trainer back then, put it into your hand. Like a slightly underpowered dowsing machine, but you could use 4 of them in your deck. And at this stage, you're probably thinking, hang on a second, Ross, a lot of those old cards have basically been reprinted more recently with different names. Yes. Yes, they have. We talked about experience share and how important that was, and we've talked about plus power, and of course, we played plus power in this particular deck. We had to, and it was largely for the Mewtwo maths. A Mewtwo with a double colourless energy would not quite KO a Mewtwo with a double colourless energy. You would need to do 10 more damage. That's where plus power came in. We have to play switch here because, like I've said, sometimes you end up with a battered Kyurem, you want to switch it out, etc. That's where switch comes in. Lost Remover was another card which slowed your opponent down. Remember, the aim of this deck is glaciate, glaciate, glaciate. Lost Remover is just Enhanced Hammer, told you they've all come back round again, except it put energy to the lost zone so it couldn't be recovered. That was important. And again, you would use this to just slow down stuff like Mewtwo. If you came across a deck that really relied on special energy, then between Lost Remover and don't forget Junkarm basically gave you 6 of them when you played 2, and Kyurem EX, you would really be able to hurt your opponent if they relied on special energy. There was also an energy switch, like a little mini Shaman to be perfectly honest, and of course we did play a Super Odd to get anything we needed back. The one card that hasn't been reprinted since is Poker Gear 3.0. Poker Gear 3.0 let you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose a supporter card you find there and put it into your hand. It's not like Random Receiver, because Random Receiver forced you into taking a particular supporter card. This was just a way of being able to find that Twins when you really needed it. There were other things you could use it for, but primarily it was making sure you had Twins when you needed it. It was a really, really fun deck that did really well. I mean, a couple of the decks that I ended up playing against that did quite well around about then, Mew Box, using Mew Prime with a whole bunch of utility attackers. like Unpheasant to try and stop you attacking. That's right, back then, occasionally, people actually played Unpheasant. Boom. But of course, Mew's got 60 HP. If you glaciate twice in this matchup, you win the game. Reshiram was everywhere. Oh my goodness, it's got weakness. That's not good. Typhlosion was oh my goodness, that's got weakness. That's not good. I mean, it's great for you. It's not great for your opponent. Celebi was seeing a bit of play here and there. And of course, Celebi's got 60 HP. And then there were other little Pokemon like Shaman, for instance, and Smeargle, for instance. And if you can get off a few Glaciates here, you are taking out all of these Pokemon. Now, you would unfortunately need 3 unless you could get one of them in the active and use a plus power to put them up to 70. But you were just taking easy KOs against so many things. And don't forget, you had 130 HP and Outrage. A lot of people weren't able to get a one-hit KO. Then you build in stuff like the big attack on Kyurem, and don't forget you're playing Mewtwo and plus power and all of that, so you are fully prepared for the Mewtwo war, which was really central to the format back then. You did have a pretty bad matchup against Eel's decks. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. They didn't play Special Energy, so you couldn't stop them. They were very consistent, and they could play some big attackers. Now, it wasn't bad. If you could strand an Electric in the active and then glaciate 3 times, you take away all the electrics. And there were a bunch of people at the time that were playing a 30 HP Dynamo, which meant that you could get 3 KOs if you ever glaciated when they had a Dynamo on the field. Unfortunately, people started playing the 40 HP Dynamo, and that sucked. Annoyingly, the tournament where I did play it, I lost in top 8 when I just bricked, which isn't a very interesting end to the story, but I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. It was a very unique deck. It's a kind of deck we really just don't have at the moment, and I enjoyed playing it greatly. So I thought I'd give you a little look into this old deck. But maybe you remember Kyurem, maybe you played Kyurem, in which case, let me know in the comment section. Tell me your stories, go nuts, but be nice. Do make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, etc., then do check out patreon.com/PTCGRadio, and do make sure to check out my video game channel, Wassy Plays. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.